What's going on, guys? Hope everyone's having a good day. Today we had on David Pellissier. He is my cousin, and he has worked in tech for a long time. He's higher up in companies now. Um, so we get into kind of his origin story, if you want to put it that way. But it's a super interesting conversation. Today is going to be audio only. But yeah, I hope you have an awesome day. Hope you enjoy the podcast. Take care. So hey, man, how you been?
Very good. I'm excited for 2023.
Yeah, do you have any big goals in mind? Anything you're excited for?
Yeah, just kind of, I've getting back into some things, getting back to the gym, all that kind of stuff, and treating myself right and I'm trying to eat healthy, so I'm changing my diet a little bit. So just, the normal, it's a new year kind of things.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. So why don't we get into kind of like what you do for a living? Because
Sure.
you've been very successful in your life, and I think it's really cool to talk about.
Sure. Well, success is relative, but yeah, I feel like I'm the chief operating officer at a technology consulting company, and I've been essentially a consultant my entire career. And I'm on year 30 of my career, and it's been a good one, and it's been an interesting ride. I've made interesting decisions to get where I am. But I do wonder if I always would have ended up here if it weren't for timing and some decisions I made. If I still would have ended up at the same place, but we'll never know the answer to that. But yeah, the company I work for at the moment. We're a $28 million company. We've got offices in Poland and Ecuador in the U.S. and we've got about excuse me 250 people working for us. And yeah, we have a great company. It's called Productive Edge. We're out of Chicago, Illinois, and yeah, we've got a great culture, and we've been in business now for 12 years.
Wow. And have you been with them all 12 years or?
No, I've been there for this is year 7.5 or maybe 8. Let's see. I started in 2014, so yeah, I'm 8.5 years now.
Wow. So I mean, you've
Yeah,
been with them a long time, but I mean, your
yeah.
career's definitely gone a lot longer than that. And so, since this is like a contracting firm, or sorry, consulting firm, you guys have kind of like worked. You, how do I put this question? You guys go to different tech companies and help them resolve issues or better allocate resources and things like that.
Well, it's actually a variety of things. So we go in and help people, and it doesn't. We are a technology company, or we have been historically, but we also do a lot in the healthcare space right now. So we do a lot of healthcare strategy. We do a lot of general strategy. We do a lot of technology strategy. And then we do the implementing as well. But our history comes from the end where we were mostly just technologists building software for people and architecting it and designing it. And now we're kind of a lot of companies do this. You start kind of being good at building it, and now you're kind of drifting more into like, okay, we've been building these so long that we actually know so much about these different companies and industries that we can start giving strategic advice to them. And we also do a lot of research on up and coming technologies where we can talk to companies and say, hey, you should be looking at this, you should be doing this, we can help you do it, this is why you want to do it, this is how you do it, and then you can pay us to come in and also implement it for you.
Oh wow. So
Yeah,
there's like a
so
lot
so
that
so
goes to it.
yeah, and we're evolving. When I started with the company in 2014, we were just under 100 people. And at that point in time, we were just building things. We were just coming in and being the company that would go in and say, someone would say, I need to build this. I already know what I need to build. I need to build this. And Productive Edge would come in with really strong people and be able to build it. And those things could, some projects take 3 months, some take a year, some are still ongoing. We have some clients we've had for our entire existence, and we've got others that have been with us for 5 years, some for six. And sometimes those clients were building, you know, projects that last 3 months for them, and then we don't talk to them for 3 months, and then we build another thing for 3 months, and others where we're just engaged with them the whole time, building new things for them constantly. And
Wow.
then over time, we've added on, new people, new specialties, new disciplines, and started going out to these companies that we work with, and then new companies as well, and said, "Hey, we could help you with this. We see your business does this. These are some things that you should be doing to get your business to the next level. Are you interested in talking to us about it?" And then we go in and we pitch them on all that. And then when we tell them, you should be building these things, or this is how you could spend money to increase your revenue, or whatever it is. And then we say, this is how you can build it, and we will help you build it. We will architect it for you and build it for you. And sometimes we go in and we just do what we call a discovery, where we say, they may say, we have a business problem. We want you to help us solve it. And then we design it for them, the solution that is, and the architecture. We say, this is how you build it. This is how much it would cost. And most of the time they say, okay, let's turn around and you can build this for us. But sometimes they say, okay, great, this is exactly what we needed to know. And oftentimes there's a delay, and if they're going to build it, and maybe they build it internally with their own teams, or maybe they ship it out to someone else. That doesn't happen very often, but it does sometimes. So yeah, so we do a lot of the big thinking for companies these days, and our clients, they're all across the board, but they're right now there are a lot of big healthcare companies, both in the insurance space and the payer and provider space.
Wow. Well, it sounds like kind of like jack of all trades type deal, and I don't know, everything's kind of moving towards, I don't know, everything kind of all encompasses with technology now, but it's kind of cool to think of it like the idea of like you guys, if you're thinking of a gold rush being like technology and like evolving companies for technology, you can kind of think of it like you guys were the guys selling the shovels to the
Yeah,
guys trying to
yeah,
chase the gold,
yeah, to
um,
some extent, yeah.
which is
And
really
I mean,
cool.
yeah, timing is interesting. I mean, things are still evolving, and I think the thing that makes it somewhat of a gold rush is just that there's still a talent shortage. Like, not enough people, particularly in the U.S., seem to be going into computer science and related fields. So there's seems to always be a lack of talent, and there's also just increasing demand. And it's
Yeah.
interesting because I almost feel like, you know when the country was kind of, anytime it was booming, you needed lots of construction workers to go build all these buildings and all this infrastructure. Well, now much of this is all digital now, and the companies need the next new product or platform or whatever, and they need technical construction workers to go do that. And that's what we did in in the origin of our company. And now we're not only just doing that, but we're also saying, now we're the architects and the strategists that say, this is what you should build. And it's actually just becoming more and more exciting. But having our feet at the ground level, being the right time in technology, has allowed us to prosper. It's
That's
been
a
good.
really cool analogy. I never really thought about it that way, but that makes a lot of sense. And it's like you look at it because I had one of my suite mates in college was a computer science major, and pretty sure he said out of college he was offered a job for like 120K a year, like straight out of college, and like no one is making that much out of college at a 4 year degree, you know.
Yeah,
So it's
that well, and that's still happening. I mean, we recruit people right out of college, and you get paid really well. Like, if you have a computer science degree, because there's still just a shortage. Now you still have to get, you still have to be a smart person and pass pass the interview process and the screenings. But yeah, I mean, it's still a gold mine to go into computer science. And one of the things they've been threatening for years is that, okay, well, now, and this probably will happen for sure at some point in time, to various degrees, but they've been saying that all these programmers will be replaced by computers that write code for you. Or there's a lot of um, applications out there now, or toolkits that do low code or no code solutioning, where you can build, it basically builds code in the background, and you can, like, drag and drop things and say, this is a data set, I want it to go here and do this and show up here, and it builds the user interface for it. But those are really, like, they've been threatening for 20 years that that stuff's going to come along and make programmers more obsolete, but that
Well,
has happened at a glacially slow pace. So those things are around, and you still need smart people to be able to use those. But um, the demand for programmers is probably higher than it ever has been.
that's true. And like if you want to think of it back to like your analogy with construction workers, it's like they thought automation and everything was going to take that industry over, not completely, but like a good area of it. I mean, sure, we do use a lot of automated machines for like, I don't know, people don't really hand mix concrete unless you're doing a small mason job, but there's a lot of stuff that gets built. Same thing with factories too. Like not all factory, we still need factory jobs, and they said that automation would completely take that over, and it hasn't.
Yeah,
So
and with modern AI stuff, like that stuff is becoming more of a reality, and it will, like, eventually you'll be able to sit down and just say, this is what I want you to build, and it will build it. But even coming up sitting being able to sit down and articulate what you want built takes a lot of time and effort and brain power, and you got to think through all that. And while you may not need to be a hardcore techie, you still have to have a logical brain to be able to do that. So I think we'll see that change over years, but there's still that's still a pretty far out. I mean, everyone was saying 10 years ago that we were going to be all in automated driving cars, or driverless cars, right? And
yeah,
I think we're still 20, if not more, years away from that. I mean, it's just proven to be such a big hill to climb to stick and I know they exist in some cars. The Teslas will drive you and stuff, but
yeah.
to have it ubiquitous and change and have everybody just stepping into driverless cars and all this. I mean, we're just so far away from that, and I think that's the same with programmers.
I have to ask you your thoughts on this then. Have you what are your thoughts on that like integrated system with like the brain that Elon Musk is working on, the what is it called? I don't know, it's like where they like can like give you sight if you don't have sight anymore, where it like interfaces with the brain for a faster like I don't know, interface with technology. It like
I mean,
increases your bandwidth or whatever.
yeah, great. With any of these advances, if they work and they really make sense and they can be applied in a way that doesn't harm anything, I think that's fantastic. We'll see what can really come out of it. I mean, like, it's fascinating to see what the stuff can do, but also, like, sometimes we're really dazzled by some AI that does some amazing things. I mean, just recently, I think it's, what is it called, Chat GP or whatever. Uh, if you're familiar with that, that is like amazing. Like, you can go in and type in just about anything, and it can produce like
Oh,
written material, and it really does a great job of understanding what you're putting in and creating the output for it. It's like so smart and it's amazing.
is that like the
Um,
picture building?
that's the Dolly, right? So,
Oh, okay.
and this is Chat GP. Let me tell you what it's called. I have it right here.
That's super interesting though. And
Yeah, yeah, it's Chat GPT. Um,
ChatGPT.
yeah, look it up. I'll send you a link to it too.
Yeah, and it pretty much just like can articulate exactly what you're trying to put into it.
Yeah, like, you could type in something that says, "Hey, tell me," like, just to test it out. I put in, like, "Tell me the best exercises to do if you have, a very specific back problem," and it listed all out in like a second,
Wow.
and it was all well written and verbose, and it's amazing. And those kind of things, like, I think this is like, a lot of people feel like this is one of the big leaps, seeing something like this, that you can put in almost any text, it will do a really good job of understanding it and like processing it, and then giving you output that is like, it could have been written by you couldn't tell if it wasn't written by a person. In fact, a lot of people are saying, well, I'm using this to write my next slide deck from at work and stuff, and you literally can do that.
Wow.
And it's, it goes out and it's based on all the information out there. But and so it's fascinating. So and then we'll see how these things get implemented in the real world. But then someone put in like a simple, kind of like, I think someone put it. It was something that said, okay, well, when I was 6, my younger sister was half my age. Now I'm 73. How old is my sister? And it came back and it said she's 70. Or no, not 70. She said she was I don't know. It messed it up. It didn't get it right.
Yeah.
So it was like our jobs are safe. But it was some jobs are safe.
Yeah,
But
right?
definitely this stuff will replace some things. I mean, it's amazing. It could make life really easier in some ways. But like, they said the same thing about the microwave and everything else and didn't actually save us any more time. I mean, it really does, but it doesn't feel like it.
No.
But I'm really fascinated. I can't wait to see what this stuff can do, and on some level, it's going to be great, even if it replaces people writing code, and um, it's going to make that stuff easier, so we can build things faster and quicker. But it's still going to come at a price. Anyone who's building those tools are going to sell those tools to you, and then they need people to write the tools, and then you need people at your company who can use those tools and be logical enough to know how they integrate with other things and integrate with data and how, so they're still going to need all this big brain power to build things for the next 50 years, even if
Absolutely.
all this stuff comes in. So,
And like there's something that goes to say like yeah, it's all the knowledge out there, but have like over half the information on the internet or where we don't know where it's pulling from, even though it's super cool and interesting. I think there's kind of like this facet you can look at it where it's like where is it pulling the information from? Because if it's pulling some of that information from like Wikipedia or something, because that's one
and
of the things
yeah,
on the internet, like we don't
yeah,
100% know exactly where it's getting it.
yeah.
But either way, it's super fascinating and really cool. And maybe they'll develop some algorithm to be able to detect like factual information versus
Yeah, that's gonna be a
fraudulent.
tough one. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, we're already in kind of the information, I don't know, chaos vortex where there's so much information on the internet, and searching for credibility or having an indication of credibility is really a challenge. And I think about it this way: when social media popped off and everyone's reading it, and then everybody and their brother started getting on places and putting, quote information unquote. It reminds me of like, being a young kid and you'd go to the grocery store, and when you go to the grocery store you'd see like the New York Times or Chicago Tribune, and next to it would be the Inquirer, right? And the Inquirer had a picture of Bat Boy on it, and and like all this like nonsensical garbage, right? But
And
you looked at the two and you knew, okay, this is nonsensical garbage over here, the Inquirer. I know not to believe that it's farcical, and it's just whatever it is.
yeah.
And then you look at the New York Times, you're like, okay, well this is credible. And it took time and money to print those papers, and so they would go through a strenuous process of making sure they had good writers who wrote good copy, and put together something, and it took time and money to make that. And nowadays any schmo can go on the internet and put stuff on there. So yeah, I don't know how you create that credibility anymore, because even with the New York Times now, some of those papers can't survive unless you pay for them, and a lot of people aren't willing to pay for stuff on the they're not willing to pay for their information yet. I
Yeah.
think everyone will eventually. I mean, I pay for the New York Times. I think you have to have a reliable source, and it's worth investing in
And
that credibility, and putting your trust, and put money, behind it, because that's going to be what's required. But it's just as easy for people to put their money behind some you know some other garbage. So
yeah, like
it's going to be a
InfoWars
difficult
or
one.
something like that.
Yeah, Infowars.
Yeah. So
Infowars.
I mean like and that's the scary part too though is like even with like with mainstream media now too we get to a slippery slope where it's like they're not like not everything's set in stone as like you got to kind of like read between the lines a little bit. You got to be media literate Whereas like, because you don't know, not that they're not telling the truth, but they might not be explaining the full story. A lot of people will go and like headline read, and
Oh
they'll
yeah,
pull
yeah,
the wrong
yeah,
things out of it. Um,
yeah. There's definitely. I think maybe that's where how things will evolve is, as we understand more and more that those different biases that make it difficult to trust things, that maybe some of those news sources will start to create, they'll get
exactly.
better at that. Like, I mean, like, things like you got CNN on one end and Fox on the other, and they're strictly just trying to scare you to click on things and sensationalism, and that's what drives readership. And they're still capitalizing on that. And I actually think it'll take us as a society to get wise to that and start being like, okay, I don't really want to.
I
I don't.
wanna.
I shouldn't be reading this because it sounds crazy.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, it's almost
or
like everything's turned into the, not everything. I shouldn't say that, but a lot of these outlets are kind of turning into the global and what was the name of it? Global Inquirer.
Inquire.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
And it's
Inquire.
just like, well, I feel like after working in the news for a little bit, I kind of feel like we might be reaching some sort of a tipping point in like 3 to 5 years, which sounds very far out, but I think it's kind of out in the open now where we can kind of get a feel for that. Um,
Yeah.
Starting people kind of being fed up with that and people like knowing it's kind of there. Or maybe we
Yeah, I
should
hope
just start
so.
teaching kids in high school that how to be media literate, not to just read one source and kind of go to different sources and find out what the similarities are and how uh, to find the true facts from the different angles and kind of follow
Yeah.
the money and figure out, oh, what can they push through this story that would be beneficial for their sensationalism or um, their view,
Yeah.
you know?
I mean, it'll be a challenge because also the way we're consuming things now is like faster, faster, less information, but bigger headlines, as you said, And so, like, how are you going to get people who have a really short attention span to read something, take the time to decide whether it's credible or not, or whether they should believe it or not? I mean, it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
We'll see. It's
Well,
also like the current generation that's coming up. The newest, latest, greatest generation of us. They were born with this stuff, so maybe they'll do a little bit better at making their way through it because it's always been there. Versus some of us old suckers who, like, can't help ourselves and like, oh, this it's in writing, it must be true.
yeah, exactly. And that's what I mean, man. It's just like we're really still in the it's been around for what? I mean, social media's been around for 15, maybe 20 years at this point, not 20, like
Yeah, that's
15.
around, I think, the late '90s, probably, right? Like, I
Okay.
don't know, 2000, something like that. 2003 or something. Is that Facebook 2003? But there was like Friendster and MySpace before that.
Yeah.
That was
But I
the
mean,
beginnings of it. Yeah.
we look at it and we look at if we want to put it in reference to like automobiles, like they were around 50 years before people started using seatbelts.
Hmm.
So, not that,
Yeah, great.
because I don't think censorship is the answer, because I think that's a slippery slope. But I think that, like, there's going to be a way, either people are going to lean more towards away from, as a society, from like social media, or at least in like this info dumping social media that we're in today, or there's gonna have to be some sort of government like intervention that people want to push where it kind of like helps people see through things.
Yeah, and I think that would be a challenge too, because then like, once the state starts monitoring or editing or your media, then we become, you know
Yeah,
like so many terrible countries in the past who
absolutely.
have done that kind of thing. So yeah, you're right. It's a big challenge, and there's
Maybe.
also a challenge with the credibility of even paying for it. Like I was just saying, you're going to want to pay for it, because then what will happen is some less reliable news sources will try to give their information away for free, and so then there's more, classism there, because then people with money are willing to pay for news sources, and people without it aren't willing to pay for news sources,
Hmm.
and they might get a different type of news.
Yeah. Wow. Information is just such an interesting issue. I've never, well, I have thought deeply about this, but like, I haven't really talked about just like the internet and information to someone before like this. So it's very interesting to kind of ponder. Um,
Yeah, and it's gonna have a big effect on. I mean, it's already had a big effect on our political system with the Trump stuff and everything. Like it's already turned it on its head. I think going into that, we all thought that there was a certain amount of ethics and just like you know some mores of being a politician and how to be in government that we thought everyone would just follow, and if you didn't follow them you couldn't get elected or you'd be removed or people wouldn't work with you. And then President Trump showed us that that's not the case, and he's kind of single-handedly turned politics on its head. I mean, it was rife for it to happen apparently because it did, but
yeah, I mean, without going too much into it, I think that like there's definitely some things that needed to change that might have been a drastic turn towards pushing that change along. Um,
yeah,
but we're gonna have to see over. I think that might have been the drastic push that might equalize things out in terms of like everyone kind of coming to their senses and not being so polarized. Being like, oh, why don't we find someone that's like in the middle and like not
yeah, I
on
agree. I mean,
on
I
an
hope I hope
extreme.
yeah, I hope we can get there. It feels like maybe we've taken a step in that direction lately, but it's really hard to say. It's still very polarized.
Yeah.
It's scary and unfortunate, and I hope you're right. I hope maybe this was shows a flaw or some weakness in our system, and maybe we can improve it. I mean, I definitely think just having a two-party system is I don't know how well it works
Well,
in
I mean,
modern
if you
society.
go back to what George Washington said right before he ended his presidency, he warned against going into a party system because it would create dissent and polarization and would destroy
Here we are.
democracy.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm pretty sure it was in the first few presidencies where um, the vice president, and I don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure this is how it was for that, like the first like two presidents or three presidents when the party system became a thing.
Mm.
But it was like the vice president had to be of the other runnings party or other
Oh, the opposition party. That's
yeah,
interesting.
which I don't think people really like that because of whatever, but I'm not positive if that's true. I do want to look that up, but I have
Oh, it's interesting.
it sounds like it was some pretty sure that was a thing. Anyways, well, we hop back into let's go to like your journey, I guess, cuz like you're in this industry for 30 years and you're in a remarkable company that's doing really cool things, but like you started out in Western Mass just like us and you moved out to
Indiana first,
Indiana
yeah.
and then
Yes.
now you're in Chicago. So, oh,
Yeah, I'll say the evolution of that. So when I moved to Indiana when I was 13, that was 1984, I think. And when I got there, some good luck happened. Good luck slash bad luck. Like when I moved there, it was a pretty big cultural change, and going into eighth grade is not a great time for a teenager to switch schools or even particularly like regions. And where we grew up in Western Mass, it's a little bit more industrialized. It's not like ultra urban, but it's certainly not rural. And
yeah,
I moved to rural Indiana, and where people would drive their tractors to school. Not a lot of people, but there were one or two people who would do that. But it was in the cornfields of Indiana on the outskirt of a urban-ish city. But it was a big cultural change for me, and I struggled a bit. And also leaving all the friends you left behind, going to someplace new. So but I call it out because I ended up spending a lot of time alone, and my dad happened to win a VIC-20 computer for, like, he was a salesman and he won it in some sales contest. And so, brought it home. It's one of these things that you would hook up to the TV, right? They didn't have monitors yet, or at least not. Maybe they were coming or around then, but and I taught myself how to program it, and because I had nothing to do and I didn't have a whole lot of friends, and that kind of
Wow.
started my journey into getting into computer
I
science.
didn't
Like
know
I
that.
loved, yeah, I loved working on it, and like I wrote this little skateboard game. I learned how to, um, it was 8-bit, you know, characters or whatever, and I learned how to like create these sprites, and make like really low res graphics on there, which was a challenge because you're really just moving a character around, like, but you transform the bytes of the character so that it looks like something else. But anyway, I started to write this like skateboarding game, but then it was a VIC-20. It had like 16K of memory,
Oh my
16K of
gosh.
memory. So I was actually typing in lines of code, and of course this took me a long time. It took me
How
like, 2 years or something to do this. And so I was like writing small programs and bigger ones. And then I was going to write this game. I started writing it, and I filled up all the memory with just like, you basically just couldn't type anymore. It was interesting. So the way the typing must have gone right into memory. And so like you couldn't type anymore because I filled it up. My program filled it up the memory, and I just had a cassette. Like I would save it on a cassette player. It
Oh
would
my
write it out there.
gosh.
Yeah.
Wait, so how did you even start to fathom how to write code at that age for one? Did you have like a book or was it
Well,
like
the VIC-20 came with a little book, and it came with a book. And now it didn't tell you everything about BASIC, but it had very simple things about basic programming language. And then yeah, and then I went out and bought another book, or found a book, or borrowed a book or something, and then I actually like found this page about transforming the bytes for Commodore machines from characters to like could transform them to do and I just like, it was all trial and error, me trying things, and just eventually learning it that way. And and then when I was in I started in 8th grade, and then when I was in high school, eventually they started like pulling me out of class to fix all the computers and stuff. And no one was from there. Nobody really trained me on anything. And like, I mean, I did take a basic class and then a Pascal class, but I would learn. I already knew basic. I taught myself that through those books, and then I got a Pascal book before my Pascal class. And then like fixing the computers, I would just like, a lot of that was trial and error and just trying to. I guess I was able to just figure out how some of this stuff worked and what to do when there was a problem. And I don't know why they didn't. I mean, at the time they did have they didn't have like a IT department or anything. I mean, I don't think any schools really did, but like, I
in
don't know, the the guy who was responsible for it, like, he would just call me in and I would fix him.
okay.
So
And so this
yeah.
was like 19 so you're in
This
high
was like,
school
yeah, this was
1987?
86 through, or 80. Yeah, 89, until I graduated in 89, so it was like all those years. So 85 to 89 basically.
Wow. That's so
Or
cool.
84 if you include 8th grade, yeah.
That's so cool cuz like I don't know. I fool around with computers now and like I've built my own computers I should say, but I couldn't fathom doing that without the internet. Like the internet has made that so much easier, but it's like I don't know.
Oh yeah.
It's like you're
It-
inventing it reminds me of inventing the wheel like a caveman, you
well,
know?
it's not not quite so bad, but like it was much more challenging to find information back then. I mean, even in my first job, so then I went to college and I did computer science, and when I graduated, I got a job. I moved to Chicago. We can talk more about that if you'd like, but one of the things that would happen to me is I'd go on like a customer site, a client site, and I'd have to do these. I did a lot of these integrations where I was integrating these third party shipping systems with warehouse management systems. And back then it was like mainframes and mini computers and stuff like that. And
Do
There
you
was like no information on it. Literally would have to find a book, and it was hard to find a book, and it was painful, and it took so much longer. So like once the internet came on and they put all the books and manuals and conversation and everything, I mean the speed of how quickly things were adapted and learned just was exponentially better. And yeah, I mean it's the internet is just remarkable for that. It's so good, and I think it's we've grown and leapt. We've grown by leap years. Like just boom. Once we were able to read all this stuff online, you could just do things so much faster,
do,
and saved everyone time, thought, energy, all that stuff.
yeah, I definitely I want to touch on a few things just going off what you just said. I definitely want to get to like you moving to Chicago and everything. But for people that don't know, want to just describe what a mainframe is real quick.
Well, so right now, mostly we're used to servers now,
Mhm.
but servers and basically servers are now like Amazon has hundreds of thousands of servers running, and they're running an operating system, and some of them work together to consolidate, or maybe not consolidate. They mirror a lot of information, but they all run together like individual bricks, that are the brains behind a lot of things. Mainframes used to be one giant brick. So instead
Oh.
of having like 5 or 10 servers that run your organizations, or maybe 100 or whatever, you'd have one giant computer that had, a whole it may have like X number of um, processor cores in it,
Mhm.
and but everything went through one computer, and all these other things were usually terminals that were accessing that computer.
Oh, okay.
So, and then what happened was, which made a lot of sense. I actually wrote a paper on this when I was in high school, predicting this. I mean, I don't think it was much of a prediction. I think it was already going that way. Just in all fairness, was that everything would change to be distributed computing, and then everyone would have a personal computer or a small computer, and all these computers would talk to each other. And then you could use multiple, all those computers to do all the processing instead of just relying on one massive computer that had to do all the heavy lifting.
Wow.
And that just obviously went away because we learned how to do things faster, better, and smaller, and then we learned how to do it in parallel processing changed all that.
Yeah. And here's another question going off what you were saying about like kind of how the internet made things like a lot easier for you to learn. Do you think that cuz like we've been kind of stagnant with like innovation up until like 1900, then we have the industrial boom. Um and now we're like at such a fast pace with things going. Do you think it was like the information boom, I think is what people kind of refer to it as with the internet. Do you think that's just because we can learn things so quick off the internet, or do you think that's because there's such a collaborative environment for so many minds to communicate with each other on the internet to fix kind of any problem you put out there, or
Yeah, I don't
at
know
least
if we're
attempt to?
learning our things faster necessarily. There's just more information. I think we will. I think these younger generations will. They'll be able to consume much more information, I think, because there's so much more available. But like, for me, I'm still like, I have to sit and really read something and absorb it, and I'm wondering if like what will people will evolve to be able to be like, there's all this information, and they're going to be able to consume it, and then know how to reason through it, and come to conclusions faster or better. But yeah, I'm not really sure. I mean, but as you see, the internet is really just a collaborate. Like it is collaborative, that everyone's just dumping information into there, and the challenge will be, like we mentioned earlier, how do you sort through all this information, and come up with something that makes sense and moves things forward? Although, because things are still moving forward, but they're moving forward through individual organizations, I think, through whether it's capital, like driven through capitalism, like companies, or like how do I make the next dollar, so I'm going to come up with innovative new things. That's kind of the driving
Yeah,
force behind capitalism. But then there's also like healthcare and other things that maybe aren't necessarily driven by capitalism. Some could
yeah,
argue, you can argue that one a little bit, but
absolutely. I just find it interesting because like when I'm looking for answers like with computer problems when I don't call you, um, but most of the issues that I've been able to resolve, you kind of just have to look down forums and people post a question, and then
Yep.
like there's
Yep.
all these different like, oh, you can try this, and if that doesn't work, try this, and it's all these different people kind of contributing, and I think it's a cool environment. I just wonder what
Yeah.
there probably is forms for much more complex problems
Oh yeah,
on
all that
computer
stuff.
systems.
Yeah, all the stuff we're building and doing. I mean, there's certainly challenges and problems that people haven't run into, and there's like intellectual property people don't want to share. But for the most part, like as far as like raw coding and difficult scenarios, and sometimes we do end up like we can't find the solution anywhere. We end up talking to Amazon, like because of their the cloud, working with their APIs or whatever, or GCP, or like sometimes we discover things that they don't know is broken, and so
Hmm.
we end up working with them to do that. And other times, yeah, you can find it out there, and it's great. I mean, but there still is the problem where sometimes you might look like for a long time to find the answer to your problem, because a lot of people have had it. They posted on 5 different forums. It was answered on one. You have to hope that someone else said, "Hey, I actually found this problem in this other forum, and here it is." So
Hmm.
you still have to dig through that information, but it is certainly wonderful and great, because it's basically, think about how many people, if that wasn't out there, how many problems would go unsolved, and how much of a time waste that is for people that when they can't solve these things.
Well, how many people just throw things away instead of trying
Yeah,
to fix it in that sense? And that's like a
totally.
whole nother thing too. It's like how many issues have just been resolved through, like, especially with car stuff. Like when I had my
Oh
old
yeah.
car, you just look stuff up on the internet how to like replace a radio that died, or and all that information's out there for like any make and model of car unless it's something super rare.
Yep.
But
It's same thing with computers. Like one of the things I did, one of my the early companies I worked at, they had these things called data queues on an AS400, and data queues are basically almost like almost like a cloud type of thing. I mean, it's just a
okay.
communication channel. So basically, it's a way of these data queues would just communicate. They're like sockets, but
Okay.
well, maybe you don't know what sockets are. So anyway, it's just a communication channel. So you would connect. You'd have two data queues, an in and a read and a write kind of thing.
Mhm.
And there was like, I had to write a DLL to have a programming language. I had to write one to allow a generic programming language to hit the DLL and use the data queues on a PC, and the AS400 was on a like a mainframe.
Okay.
So, and I literally had to go through a book. Like I had this AS400 book that was like 200 pages long. It was a binder, and and to write this thing, I wrote it in C++, and I was basically just like lost. And it took me, I don't know. I think it took me like 2.5, 3 weeks or something of like 8 hours a day programming to get it right and get it working. But it was like I was lost in the wilderness. I mean, like I had no clue. I just had this this little map, and I was able to figure it out and make it work. But now, if I wanted, like today, if I needed that, someone's already written it, so I
Yeah.
can just go and find it. Or if I was the first person writing it, there'd be enough people to even help. Or like I could probably post something, say I'm trying to do this, help, and people will help you. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah. And that's such a cool story too, because like it kind of also harkens back to like your um roots of where you came from with all of it too, just because like you were used to at the time figuring out like those issues where I don't think someone new coming into the industry from having the internet around the whole time they were learning it would 100% be able to do that right off the bat, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, that's true. Although on the flip side, people who are programming out there now, the plethora of information out there. I mean, like people can just write codes around, or circles around me in coding. Like I mean,
Oh,
even
absolutely. And there's
yeah,
nothing to take away from them. I'm just saying because they have a different, they had to grow a different skill set.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you
That's very
like,
true.
yeah, it's just like kind of cool to see the evolution of an industry I didn't really know that much about. Just by kind of talking to you because it is still a pretty new industry, even though it's been here for a while. But like a lot of people don't really know the ins and outs of it, and
Yeah, yeah, I feel lucky somewhat to be, so, like, when I was doing that in the 80s, it was certainly like, even though, computers has been around since what, the 30s or whatever, but like, the evolution from like the 90s on, like how quickly it grew compared to the 30s to the 80s was like, so, like, it was a sluggish pace, and then all of a sudden they got things small enough so that it just like popped off. It was just, but I'm fortunate to be like pre-internet and post-internet, like to see
mhm.
how that evolved and all that. And I mean, it's interesting, but it's also like, I don't know how useful it is anymore. I mean, I guess I left with the skill of, oh, when there's a problem, I'm good at trying to dig in and solve it in one way or another, with or without information, right?
Well,
So,
not just that, man. It's like you got to really take into mind that you're like a producer, you know. You know all the different avenues to go to where and bring these different people together to be able to create things that companies need help with.
yeah,
So don't
that's
sell,
true.
don't sell yourself short on that, man, because that's like I wouldn't even know where to begin, let alone the different what's it called, skills people would need to be able to do that. So don't sell yourself short with that.
All right, fair enough.
But I that's definitely something you can take from that too, is just like the fact that since you had to like look in these books and read all this stuff, like you had to figure out how to find the resources to do these things. Whereas like that's kind of the differentiation that I was trying to make between like why you're very good at running a company like how you do versus someone that's new to the industry where they know how to find the information on the internet, but in almost, I don't know if you'd want to say more of an AV type setting, it's not as easy accessible. So you had to go different routes to find that, you know.
Yeah, 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 that's true.
But hopping back to what got you to move to Chicago?
So, well, when I was in college, I was in some punk rock bands, and maybe it was maybe more like post punk, like noise rock. And having been in computer science, I was like, okay, well, my buddy and I were supposed to actually move to San Francisco together, and um, the week before I graduated, it was we had this whole plan. We were going to go like, because we had like four people in the band, but two people weren't going to graduate when we graduated, and he graduated 6 months before me. And he was waiting for me to graduate, and so then the day I graduated, I called him, and his roommate answers the phone and says, "Hey, Dave, how's it going?" I was like, "Not too bad. Is Jeff around?" He's like, "Oh no, Jeff moved back to New Jersey last week." And I was just like, holy moly. Like, my whole future, like, we'd been talking about it and all this, and we were gearing up and all ready to do this together. We were just going to pack up. I had a car, he didn't have one. I was going to pack up. We were going to move this. We were just going to drive to San Francisco and figure it out. We were going to take a couple $100 with us, figure it out. And yeah, so he bailed the week before. So then all of a sudden I'm left with like, well, what do I do? And so I decided to look around the Midwest and think, okay, where should I go? And so, like, I had a couple options. There was a big music scene in Louisville, Kentucky at the time. There's these bands Slint and a whole bunch of other really great music coming out of there, Palace Brothers. And
Yeah.
I thought, oh, let's look down there. So I had a friend who had moved there and went down there and looked for employment. And this was back in the day when you would have to get the newspaper, and you would have to, this is 1990, what was it, 94 still. The internet was there, but it was still kind of the Wild West, and not every company would post their jobs online and all this stuff.
Hmm.
And there wasn't even places to go, right? Like, you were still using things like Kermit to look around the internet, So, um,
I couldn't even tell
I
you what Kermit is.
well, look it up. It's the precursor to a lot of stuff, but
Okay.
to like web browsing.
Okay.
So, um, I would go. So I went down there and I got a newspaper and then called a bunch of places, applied to jobs. And you would write. You would also like you would call, or some of them you would just mail your resume to them and put your address and stuff. I didn't get anywhere. I didn't try super hard, but there wasn't much going on employment wise there. So um,
Okay.
I went back to Indiana. I mean, I just went for the weekend, and then I had a friend in Chicago. And then I was like, okay, I'm moving to Chicago. I'd been there a bunch of times, and I loved it. And I was just like, okay, so same thing. I went up. I got a newspaper there and started calling places, and then a recruiter called me back. No companies did, just a recruiter. Actually, that's not true. I had a couple of job interviews at Motorola at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and um, that didn't work out for me. I think they were looking for someone more senior in both the roles I was applying to, but they knew I was right out of school, so or maybe I just didn't interview well. I'm not really sure. But I got this job with a company where I was kind of like a one-man army. So instead of going to work in a big software, like at Motorola, I would have been on a team of like 5, 6 other people and writing these bigger applications. And instead, I ended up going to this like small, really small company out of Tulsa, Oklahoma that had a satellite office in Chicago. And I was a one-man army. So basically I would have to go in and they, like I said before, with these logistics systems, they would sell this third-party logistics system, like a shipping system that integrated with their warehouse management systems and generate labels and send information to all the carriers like USPS and FedEx and all this stuff. Um, and I was responsible for like writing the different modules on this software, but also working with the client, understanding their needs, um, writing these things, testing them out, proving they work, and then supporting them afterwards. And it was just like a ton of responsibility for someone who is 23.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Yeah, and I'm kind of shocked now looking back that they would ever even let me do that. But I was good at it. So like when I went in and when I went in to do the programming work and stuff, I was good at that. And I was decent at talking to clients. And the one thing I wasn't good at was the discipline of thinking through, okay, how do you really think through a customer's problem statement, and like how do I think through the right way to architect that and solve that, and the right way to make sure, especially with these kind of live logistics systems, they have to work 100% of the time. There's no like you can't have they can't be buggy, right? So
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of times what I was writing was simple, like or at least the solution was somewhat simple, but you had to make it simple, and if it wasn't, you had to you had to make it simple, because if it failed, I would get called. Like I remember I got called back to this. One of my clients was in Chicago. Most of them were in the suburbs. So I was living downtown Chicago. Um, well, not downtown, not in the Loop, but I was living in like Wicker Park.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, I would drive every day out to these different places. But one of mine was luckily on the far north side of Chicago, and like I made a mistake. Like I wrote something, I tested it, everything looked good, but I didn't test this one use case because I wasn't aware of it. And he called me back. I had already driven home, which took me an hour and a half at rush hour. And he called me and it's like, this doesn't work. You got to come back. So I had to drive back at like 7 or 8 at night and fix this thing. And it took me like 5 minutes to fix because once you identify the use case and like I said, you made everything as simple as possible. I just had to change the code to work with this specific use case and behave correctly. But that, man, doing that one time, because because I basically had to spend like 4 extra hours driving, was painful enough for me to be like, okay, I've got to change the way I think about this. I've got to be more disciplined and think through these solutions end to end and really spend more time up front making sure that these things are going to work, and think through all the test cases and think through like the error I made was not identifying the use case, and part of that was because I didn't ask the right questions of the client. So anyway, I'm saying all this because I learned so much from it. It wasn't a great job. I
Well,
don't think many people wanted this job, but I learned so much from being a one-man army who had to do all these things.
I think
That
that
that that really led to that gave me the skills I needed in order to get where I am today.
yeah, man. I was gonna say like that's so I can't. I'm not gonna talk about where I work, but I think when you're in any kind of system, you know, you really need to understand all the different avenues to create the best product and be the best position that you're at. So if I can understand, say, the salesperson asking these questions like you had to be because you were a one man army going into that, since you were had to learn to ask the correct questions and see what that salesperson that at a big tech company you wouldn't be asking these questions, you'd just be receiving the information from it. um, you're able to diagnose more issues and problems in your position than someone that didn't have to learn how to do all that, you know? I don't
Yeah,
know if that completely
that's
makes
right. Well, and
100% sense.
no, that makes sense. I mean, so basically, it taught me that there's more to the story than just going in and writing something. There's like it taught me quickly the nuances of engaging with someone else, and in this case the client, to understand an idea, how to construct it correctly, how to build it and support it, like end to end. There's all this nuance in this. I mean, we still have this problem. Like that's where the field of like UX has come about, is because that's such a huge problem that needed to be solved, which was we need someone to sit down and really understand what someone's trying to build, or why they need it. Really is usually what you're doing these days, is like, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Okay, let's talk through what a solution is and why do you really need it. Is it going to hit the outcomes, and you're building a better user interface and a better customer journey, and you're understanding what you're going to build more. But like the breakdown starts to happen immediately in your first conversation when you're talking to someone, and in their mind they can visualize what they want, and when they tell it to you, it's the telephone game, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to understand and try to get it right. It's such a challenge. It's so hard. And it's
Yeah.
been interesting to see the evolution of you know back in the day, when IT departments were forming in companies, everyone would go to the programmers, even in application development programs or companies. They would go to the programmers, and the programmers were kind of the kings, right? They knew how to do this, so they started having programmers making all these decisions, and sometimes even business decisions, which was a mistake,
Mm-hmm.
because they were the people who knew how to build these things. And then so over time, what's happened is they've just been slicing and dicing that, because then eventually they're like, okay, well, now we don't want to have like we don't want we need like support people. We need like people who maybe aren't programmers, or they're aspiring programmers, to like, after someone writes a whole bunch of code, these support people are going to go in, and when there's a problem, they know how to use the application, and they know where the problems are, or they'll help you know figure out what some of the problems are, and then maybe they're liaison between the programmers and the user to fix it. And then they're like, okay, now we're going to develop architects. So architects are going to solve it, but they're not going to be the programming people. They were programmers, and now they really know how to construct it. And now we have UX people who go on the front end, and along the way we got project managers and BAs and all this stuff. It's been really interesting to see how that's been kind of divided and conquered in responsibility, but that it's like growing instead of shrinking. It's like growing more and more and more. So now there's so many more roles in software development because of all the nuance that I was talking about in this. And it's still like it's more identifiable today. Everyone knows where the nuances are for the most part.
Yeah.
And I learned that all really early. And it's been to my advantage.
100%. And there's two things I kind of want to take to ask you about there, and it's just like, is there like a registered form of communication? Because communication has to be so key in that, between all those different roles that you just described. Is there like, do you guys build systems to correctly communicate so everyone can fully understand, uh,
Well, yeah,
between the
everyone
customer and
has a different way of doing that these days, but I mean a lot of it's very similar. Like you do these work breakdown structures, you you start with wireframing, you start with just sketching stuff. I mean, yeah, I mean, if you go online, you can just see there's a million ways to do it these days, and I mean, most of them follow some, there's some logical way to progress through those, but I mean, there's a million different ways. And in
Almost
fact,
like a
with all,
scientific method.
yeah, I mean, like, I don't know if I would call it that, but like everyone figured out, okay, well, when we're capturing or communicating information, we've got to be more deliberate in how we're recording that and sharing it with other people, and like when we're going to go from this phase where, okay, let's do these low def drawings where we're just going to on a back of a napkin draw like what the user interface will look like with pen and paper, and just say, this is my lo-fi rendering, and let's not put a lot of time into that because we know it's going to change. And then, then they'll pass it off to a BA who's like, okay, I want to ask these questions about where the now that you this is generally what we want. Where's the data come from? What's the data that look like, and how does this work? And they're trying to understand the business problem you're trying to solve. So now it passes down a chain, and then when it gets handed to it used to be people use cases. They would write all these use cases, and now sometimes they call them, like, what do they call them? They're like it's evolved from like all these requirements to just new ways of passing that information down the chain. So yeah, that has evolved greatly, and there's a ton of that out there. So we didn't come up with anything new, at least at my company, to solve that. I mean, we've evolved with the time to solve that problem.
Yeah, it's really cool that the way you got to learn it too, and at the time when you got to learn that, and kind of harkening back to like the beginning of our conversation, you said something in describing that what was it? It was when you were talking about it's escaped me, but it, kind of like how media affects yeah, I don't know, I lost it.
Come back to it if
Yeah,
you
we'll
think of
come
it.
back to it. No, but man, it's just so interesting. Like there's so much. I didn't know you were in a band either.
What? You
No,
didn't know I
you
was in a
you never
band?
told me that, and that's something that ever got brought up.
Oh, you should ask your mom about it. I mean, she
Yeah.
knows I was in a band. I don't know if she ever actually heard any of it, but
What instrument did you play?
guitar and well, I played guitar and drums. We would like switch off instruments, and I sang too. I mean,
Okay.
it was a '90s mess, but it was fun. I mean, I really liked it. I thought for a minute I was gonna be a rock star of some sort, but
That's
yeah,
awesome though.
that didn't pan out. It was better, and I
Yeah.
made the right decision. I kind of realized my talent only ran so deep on the musical side, so I was like, okay, I guess I'm just gonna stick with doing this computer science stuff, see where it takes me.
Hey, I mean, it worked out, man. I mean, sounds like you love your job for one, and two, that it's like awesome. Like the stuff you do, you create really cool things.
I do, and I do love my job, and the thing that's evolved with it is adapting from it is just like the more time I've spent in a leadership position, the more I think about I just think about leadership constantly and the ways you influence a culture of a company, and how how you take care of people, and how you think about your role in a company, and all those things are the things that make me happy, is like working with, like, we have such a great culture at my company, and people are really happy there. We have really low turnover, even in our industry where turnover is like relatively high, because every single technical person at my company gets phone calls and emails every other day from recruiters saying, do you want a job, do you want a job, do you want a job, because like I said, there's a big shortage,
Hmm.
and there has been, and they can go get more money somewhere else too. And but they stay because they know, okay, well, I may be able to get more money, but then, like, I'm going to walk away from the place I'm at. And our company is just, we care so much about autonomy and letting people work the way they want to make lean on them to make the decisions rather than any kind of top down approach. And been super it's just been a great place to work at. And I feel like really
Absolutely.
spent a lot of time thinking about how do I influence this culture? How do we create this culture? Which I feel like I was very influential in making what it is today. If I'm going to pat myself on the back for anything, I'll take that one.
Yeah. And yeah, man. That's a big thing too, is just like, I don't know, I think working with people and understanding people brings so much, I don't know what the word is for it. Not gratification. Um you get so much out of it. I don't know. It makes me feel happy to help other people out and kind of create positive change and create a positive environment. And it sounds like that's kind of your driving force.
It
At
is, yeah.
yeah, and that's awesome. And I, you just said it again, and it brought up what I was gonna try and hook in there. Was we were talking about communication and like the media and stuff earlier, and you're saying how it's like kind of like a big game of telephone, and I think that's the big thing that we kind of are finding out with our media today and stuff is like, since we're in such a interesting part with information, we get a lot of the telephone game,
Oh yeah,
and I
yeah,
think that's
yeah,
what we're moving towards, is kind of getting more direct and better communicating our information.
yeah. Well, it's in so. And speaking of this, and one thing that I'm thankfully starting to see throughout like all industries is because of some of this, more people who are workers, us being workers, we read about other companies and how they treat their employees and how they take care of them and what their cultures are like. And by seeing that and hearing about it, it puts a lot of pressure on bad cultures and bad companies with bad leadership to change and make it better for the individual workers. So, we spend I spend just so much time sometimes thinking about how bad leadership affects cultures and how it permeates it all the way down to the people on the front lines so quickly and easily. Like when you have bad leaders, that just happens. It's just like a cancer that poisons. And what I've done is spent a lot of time thinking about how do we prevent that? Because as you grow, as a company grows, it becomes more bureaucratic in some ways. And one of the things I fight against so hard is making sure we're not creating waste by creating too much bureaucracy and too much process where it's not needed. So I really rail against that. I really spend a lot of time on that. But then you need some of that because you have to have consistency in things you do. And if you're doing some things right, you want to propagate that throughout the company so everyone does it right. But you also want to provide autonomy so they can do it their own way. But you want the outcome to be, something very, you want the outcome to be the same, but the way you get there can be different, but you don't want it to be too different because you want the consistency and you want it done right. So it's a real
Hmm.
challenge to balance those. But in bureaucracies, the breakdown is in communication, and sometimes it's not. I mean, frankly, sometimes the communication is because people are talking when uh, I'm muddling a lot of thoughts here, but
People aren't listening.
well, I think they are, but they're listening to a lot of different things, and in some ways you want to control the message in a company, but the way you do that is by being transparent. And what happens is a lot of companies, they want to manipulate the message, and when the message doesn't match reality, people stop believing what the message is, and then that's when they're not listening to the message anymore.
Oh, you just
And
blew my
like
mind. The
so I
amount.
and I
Oh,
we spend a lot of time like so we love having a culture where when things go wrong, we put it on the table and we talk about it in a polite and diplomatic and respectful way and we solve it. And what happens is, and the bigger bureaucracy goes, like there's a lot of politics. Sometimes people need to be removed from organizations because they're not effective at their jobs. And you know what? When you work in an organization where people don't remove those, where people like that aren't removed, it creates lots of problems. Nobody looks at an organization and says, "Thank God they kept this person who's not effective at their job." People get concerned and they get upset and angry because they want that change. And sometimes you just have to sit down with people and say, "Look, you're not doing this well. Let's lay out the things you can do better, and we can help you with it. But if you can't do that, then maybe this isn't the right place for you.
Mm-hmm.
But in big bureaucracies, they do a thing called transfiring, where someone's working on a team or in a role, and instead of actually removing them from the organization completely, they, send them to a different team or a different department, and that just propagates all this. Like, and then people lose faith in the organization. And
Yeah.
but I could go on all these different things. I won't. But like bureaucracies, like one of the things we work with so many bureaucracies, we kind of that's one of the great things. And I love these big companies. I love the way their brains. I love the way the output they give so often, but so many times from inside they are just broken, or
Mm-hmm.
they are really slow and difficult. And we work from the outside, and we're able to come in as consultants and go in and be the change agent and be like, okay, well, we see this is wrong, or maybe we're just going to build something and we have all these obstacles, and we find ways around the obstacles. And obstacles may be, oh yeah, this other department won't give us access to this API, or this other department doesn't want you to change this or something. And we find ways to get those things done where if you are inside the organization, because of the politics, it's so hard to make change. And
Mm-hmm.
I really want my mission to be, how do I continue to grow this company and make sure that as we grow and scale, we don't like adopt all those bad things that bureaucracies typically do.
I love that. I love that message. And you blew my mind there because like you just look at the parallels of like how you can just see that in so many different areas of society, just not just in companies. I could go on for hours about that. I won't. Um, but like I think it just kind of comes down to like, and I'm glad you're seeing this shift as someone being higher up in companies that like it's better to care for everyone and make it a better place than to not be truthful and make everyone miserable. I don't
Yeah.
know if that
Yeah.
makes complete sense, but
No, it does. And well, another thing that's changed is you get less and less of this commander style leadership, and you get more of the servant leadership style. Where when I came up in the workforce, there was this top down hierarchy. It was very like, I don't know, they say a lot of it was based off of all these people coming out of World War II. They were in the army, and they thought this is how you run a corporation. I don't know how true that is, so don't quote me on that. But it feels like, when you get into this company, all of a sudden you have this top down, like, you have the top brass, and you don't get to talk to them. And there's like, you can't be insubordinate. You can't question your leadership and all this kind of stuff. And when you do something wrong, you get bonked on the head, you get yelled at, they tell you how terrible you are and all this kind of stuff. And that stuff was permeated every company. It seemed like that when I was coming up in the workforce, and I hated it, and I just could never understand. I was just thinking about human incentives, and like thinking like, how is you yelling at me or berating me or telling me how terrible I am going to help the situation, going to help me or make future change? All it's going to do is make me frustrated and agitated and lose faith in that leadership and not want to be around it. And it's amazing that there's still some of those style of companies and leadership out there, this top down hierarchical. It's really terrible leadership, like bonking
mm-hmm.
people on the head. Like, when someone does something wrong, like I really believe you have to sit down as a team and say, okay, look, it's me, you, and someone else, or just me and you, and we're on this team. We're working on the same team. We're running the same plays out there to try to get a specific outcome. And what you didn't work. Let's talk about how you can do that better, or if you could do it better, or if there's other ways you can do this, rather than just saying, hey, you piece of garbage, you didn't do this right. Shame on you. And if you do it again, you're gonna get fired. Like, so they tried to run all these organizations by everyone being threatened about their job, right? And
Yeah.
partially this has changed because the information is out there, and other companies see, like, you know that other companies do it differently and better, and people are happier, and being happy at work became a real thing. But also because of low unemployment, people weren't so threatened that they're going to lose their job. A lot of them are like, okay, fine, yeah, I'll just go find another job, right? So then that style of leadership became ineffective, which is one of the best things ever because it was so dumb.
Mm-hmm.
you
Well,
know
have you ever seen that photo? It's it's one side of a mountain. It has a leader, and the other one, I want to say it was like a boss or something. It was two different things, but a leader was on one side, and the boss is pushing his foot on top of the head of one of the people on the side of his mountain to get to the top. The leader is at the top pulling up other people
Yeah, yeah,
to,
great. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
and that goes exactly to kind of what you're saying is like, I don't know, maybe for better productivity and better happiness in a company, it needs to have leaders and not bosses, if you get what I
yeah.
mean.
Well, and one of the big changes is like having a employment is optional. Like I mean everyone has to have a job or well, they not everyone has to, but everyone wants to have a job, right?
Hmm.
But working at a company is still an option, right? So like I think about it like this in the past that commander style leadership was like you have to do this, right? And it's there's no option. But the reality is like people who work for you, work on your team with you, they're there optionally. And so I think about being a leadership like the best way to judge how good of a leader you are is if like when you're going somewhere, if you turn around, look who's following you, who's behind you. You know, that's how you judge a good leader. You look back and say, am I actually guiding these people? Are they following me? Or are they just like, do they not care about what I'm doing or saying? But I'm certainly not making them go anywhere. You know, I'm not you're not hurting cattle. You're trying to bring someone, and when they really like like what they're doing, like the message, like how they're being treated, they will follow you, right?
Absolutely.
And
And that's
yeah,
the way to get the best possible product outcome too, is like having people that are passionate about something that want to be
oh yeah,
there doing it. If you're
absolutely.
it
Happy people do amazing things.
Yeah,
Unhappy people, yeah, there's
you're,
not much efficiency there, you know.
no. And it's like look at high school. Someone that isn't interested in a class is just going to sit there and just get that stuff done, but someone that wants to be in a class is going to be there jumping in on the discussions, maybe even leading the discussions and pushing the class
Yeah.
further than it originally was going to go, you know?
Yeah, and that's why autonomy is so important because okay, let's say you've kind of checked the first box where you're not a jerk, you're a decent leader, you have a company that does, you know, decent things and people like the stuff they're doing. Well, now give people autonomy where we're saying, okay, we all agree we're going to try to get from point A to point B and this is the outcome we want. This is what it looks like. Now, we're going to work together, but I'm going to let you figure out how you want to get there. Unless you want help and then I'll help you, but otherwise I'll let you figure it out. So then you're letting someone who's doing a job really enjoy doing their job because they get to do it. They get to be like they're empowered to decide. They're empowered to make change. They're empowered to fail so that they can learn and do the next thing better. You give those two things to people, people are happy. And then why would they leave that job? And we've had people leave and they come back sometimes because they leave because they're like, oh, I want to go work for some big company that's going to pay me more. And we pay well. We pay very well, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
But there's always someone out there who was willing to pay more because they need it more in some cases. Like they're willing to put all that money down. They have bigger clients, they're bigger companies, and but like so many people like we're not afraid of losing because the, a lot of our people are seasoned, they've been to those big companies and they know when you go to work for one of those what it's going to be like. And we've created a culture that you when you get in there you can, this is your home, and it's still challenging. We have hard conversations like I mentioned, so it's not a walk in the park, but that's what I think people want out of their jobs anyway. They want to be challenged, they want to continue to grow, they want to be happy, they want to feel supported, and they want to be a part of a successful team. That's why it's important when things aren't working out, you make the adjustments.
And
You do all those things, and you have this amazing company.
yeah, and I think there's another level of that too is like you guys trust your employees. That's
Yes,
like
yeah,
a huge thing too, is like to feel like someone has trust in you is massive for people. In a
yeah. That's
society where, you know, a lot of people don't trust each other, especially with how polarized it is. Having someone look to you and be like, "Hey, you can do this. Go do it for me."
yeah, that
Like,
feeling of empowerment and trust. Yeah,
yeah.
that's it's not magic, but it kind of feels like magic. especially if you've been at some bad companies, and then you go to one where like, okay, well, yeah, let's solve this. I'll let you figure out how you want to do this.
Yeah.
And when people feel that empowerment, they feel like they're in control, and they feel like this is my thing, and it also makes them more invested in doing good work.
Mm-hmm.
When you're following things colored by numbers or following a specific process, I mean, that's not a great feeling. At least not for me. I feel like if your job, lacks creativity, and you have to follow a process that someone else wrote and hope that it is the right process, and you don't get to put your brain power into it, like, I don't know, that's not for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's some people who love that and they want that, and they want to kind of float and just kind of get by. Yeah, that's great, they can do that. That's not the kind of company we have. And you know once you start accepting that in a company, that's what you're going to end up with, because then only the people who want to kind of skate by are going to be at those places.
Exactly. And a lot of those places you don't find. I mean, you can find plenty of like happy people and stuff, but I've worked at some places like that, and there's often a very negative attitude.
Oh yeah. No, it's
And
and then what happens is you have these really smart, ambitious leaders at the top, but then the rest of the organization is just moves like a slug,
mm-hmm.
and you can't institute change, and you're not outputting great product. It costs more, it takes longer, and then these bureaucracies don't know how to change it, and then they're not incentivized to change it that much because the people at the top want to still be in control, but the people at the top are actually the problem. But they love to blame the bureaucracy for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Shoot, that's you should run for president.
I don't know about
Yeah,
that.
well, no, man, I don't know. It's just it's so inspiring to hear you like talk about all this, and it's cool, man. It really is, and just to see that really prove to people that they're leaders in in different companies and in your company that like truly do like care about just putting it out there for people to know that um
Well,
is
it's
very inspiring.
yeah. I think about it this way. I also think I want to work. I want to be a leader at a company that I want to work at. So that means I also want to work with people that I like, and 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 that doesn't mean we're all friends, but like like working with them. I like being around them, and like, again, going back to the happy people. When you have a whole bunch of happy people, as there's still stress. Don't get me wrong. There's still stress. There's still challenges. Things go wrong. But when you know you're supported, you feel a lot different when things go wrong. You still feel bad. Still feel like, woe
Hmm.
is me. Like, but then you feel like, okay, we're on a team and we're behind. We gotta catch up. We gotta do more, and not like, feel like you're gonna get pushed overboard, or you're gonna get fired for something. It's
Absolutely.
like, yeah. And the reality is most places, people don't get fired because they aren't strong performers. There's other reasons. But, sometimes that has to happen, but it's not because you did one thing. It's because you did a whole bunch of things wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, it's just thank you, man. I don't know, it's just so cool to hear all this. And yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think for me, it's like I want businesses to look like this. And I
Hmm.
think they all should. And I think it's actually a no-brainer. It doesn't take a lot of thought. I think And I think a lot of businesses aspire to do that. It's just that challenge of, as you grow and scale, it becomes difficult, and it even more difficult to change a company, a bureaucracy that already is there. It's so much harder to change a big company than it is to change a small one. It's like you have to. There's a lot of changes you need to make, but it's definitely doable. And I'd love to see just people being happier working at these places.
Yeah.
And so, in some ways, I'm lucky that not everybody sees this, because it helps us retain lots of really good, talented people, because there's not a lot of places for them to go.
Well,
Well, that's not true. In fairness, there's lots of great companies out there. Don't get me wrong, but
yeah.
like, there's also a lot of really terrible companies.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's just cool because like the more we push towards something like that where people like whatever percent per capita can feel happy and supported and work at work, we push towards a happier society, a more understanding society, and like it, productivity of our country goes up just as a whole. You look at places like Italy. Their I think it was their manufacturing output is almost as high, like just below percent per capita as the U.S. and they get 3 months of vacation a year, but they must just work their ass off when they're at work or something because they have so much downtime, but they're
They'll get it
like
done. Yeah.
yeah, their output is almost like percent per capita is something like just below the US's, and we work outrageously more than them. Um,
Yeah. Well,
it,
it does become a challenge when you look at if you go back and you look at when you get down to manufacturing and physical labor and some of those things. I mean, so it's a bit harder to keep everybody happy because it's hard to provide more autonomy when it's like, okay, well, your job is to, you know, like produce this widget, right? Like, or
yeah.
pull a lever or something.
Hmm.
Then if that's your job, that's your job. It's going to be hard to be happy unless you're happy with that, right?
Yeah.
But then, you know, it's when you get further up the chain that things get a lot, it's that's when I say further up the chain, I mean different types of jobs that maybe, take where you can give autonomy and let
Hmm.
people solve things. That's where you can make the big change.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
And I'm just quoting. There's this documentary by Michael Moore called "Where to Invade Next," and he goes to Italy and um, he talks about this. Michael Moore is a very interesting individual. I don't really 100% agree with most of his films, but I think "Where to Invade Next" is a very interesting film to check out. And he
Yeah,
talks about
I'm with you. I think most of the stuff he does at least is very thought provoking, right?
yeah,
So that's
absolutely.
not sure I agree with some of the approaches and everywhere he goes with it, but got to think about that. I mean, like the type of business I'm in right now, you know, we build these projects, and most of the time, the way you quantify them is for some we can quantify and say this is how much it's going to cost to build it, and we just have like a fixed price. But for a lot of it, it still also is like people want to they have to justify it to their procurement by saying, okay, these are hourly costs. So we get paid by some of depending on the project, we get paid by the hour.
Hmm.
If we didn't do that, and if everything was based on just the outcome, I would certainly one of the things I would do, and if I ever change jobs in the future, which I'm sure I will, but when I do, if I'm at a place where I can, I would definitely change to like 6 hour days or something like that
Hmm.
because I feel like there's so much waste, and if one, I think it would make people happier. Two, it'd be good for the economy. They'll have more time to spend more money, which is, a big change they made in the past because they had everybody working all the time. They didn't have any time to spend money, so it wasn't good for the economy. But like, I think if you had 6 hours a day to do certain things instead of 8 hours, everyone would find a way to do that. I
Oh,
mean, now,
absolutely.
and again, back to the manufacturing and physical labor things, that may not be the case for everything. So there may be some jobs where literally you have X number of things coming through at X speed and X things have to happen. There may not be a way to output more without some
Well,
ingenuity to
also
change
going
that.
back
But
to our AI talk, those sort of jobs and however long, I'm not going to try and put a number on it, but a lot of those jobs may be outsourced to AI in the future. Who knows?
yeah, well, yeah, that would be, some of that stuff's just like in the automotive industry.
Hmm.
Some of those stuffs are the first to go because those things are the first to go because they can build machines to do those behaviors. I mean, one of the things we do work in some automation, and we work with a product that is basically almost kind of like a framework for automation, but like it goes in and like people in the insurance industry will submit a claim. They have to have software that will write, like a lot of times they have to write some kind of letter or something, and they have to be able to process the claim, even if it's like a handwritten letter. And so they've automated a lot of that because if it comes in a form, even if it's handwritten in the form, that's good. But for some of these types of claims, they just have to have something sent to them within 72 hours or something like that. And sometimes it's fully handwritten, and they have to have software that goes through this OCR software and goes through and recognizes the text, recognizes the letter, converts it to text, and figures out whether it needs to be expedited or not because of certain laws that say that if you get this notification, the insurance company has 72 hours to do something with the claim.
Oh wow.
And that stuff's already out there in big numbers, but it's still like doing 70% of the work and not 100%. So you still need people not only to still be doing that for the things the automation can't identify, but also to check to make sure the automation worked. So
Mhm.
so until you get to 100% of something, which is really challenging for a lot of things where the human brain does something so well, like even just like optics, like as a person looking down the street, just say for example, your brain immediately processes everything and can really figure out what's going on in a split second. Well, if you have like a camera in a computer, I mean, it can do some things in front of you. It's got to identify shapes and stuff, but we're nowhere near its ability to judge something way down the road, and whether it's, you know, not what it is. It might identify it's a cat or a dog or a bike, but like the human brain can immediately figure out right now, like, okay, if that's a bike, which direction is it moving? How am I anticipating where it's going to go? Where a computer would struggle with that, mostly right now because it's so far away. If it's closer, maybe it starts to identify those objects. But like my point is, we're still far away on automation of all
Yeah.
types to be able to replace some of the thinking we're doing.
Oh,
It will come, likely
yeah.
it will come, but we're still really far away from it.
Yeah. And I think there will always be jobs for anyone that like likes that
Yeah,
type of work.
someone's got to write the
Mhm.
the automation. Someone's got to write the process. Someone's got to make sure the process is right. Someone's got to monitor it. I mean, there's going to be jobs that have to deal with all those things. Yeah, there
Yeah.
may be less jobs. There may be less unskilled or low skilled jobs. That's for sure.
Yeah,
But
but I think there'll always be a place for people that like those jobs better to have. I don't want to like scare people into thinking that there won't always be something like that. Um,
yeah,
but
well, it's just like they thought the steam engine when the steam engine came out that was going to replace people's jobs and all this stuff, and it did
mhm,
some. But then the
mhm,
jobs just moved to a different place.
exactly. Yeah, and I don't know. I think it's just interesting because like I used to be a janitor, and I'd work for 8 hours, but I'd only actually work for 3 of those hours, because you could finish the job in um, 3 hours. The buildings I had to do at the said place, and it's just kind of interesting to think that like, hey, why is it determined that 40 hours of work is the dead minimum for everyone for regular wage, where we could just up the wage per hour, have them come in for 3 hours, and then get out of
Yeah.
here and not waste people's time, you know?
Yeah, and I think we're getting closer to that, but it's still a long way off. It's really hard to change the society's view on, I mean, the 40-hour work week, I think it was probably speaking out of school here, but like implemented like I think by Henry Ford or something. He made it 40 because people were working 12-hour days every day. And like I said, like I think he changed it because he was basically like there's nobody to drive the cars as everybody's working.
Oh,
So
wow.
when it became the 40-hour work, that was a reduction from what people were working before. And I really think we need future reductions because I mean I don't know that we really need to be working 8 hours a week. And it is, you're right, it's still this magic number that everyone is like, yeah,
Yeah.
you got to work 40 hours a week, and sometimes it doesn't make any sense. It should be out like I like your idea of output driven, right? Like what's
Mm-hmm.
the outcome you're trying to hit, and what's the cost of the outcome? Because basically, if you do own a building and you want it cleaned, and someone can do a really efficient job, 100% like an A+ job in 3 hours, just pay them that price. What do you care whether it takes them 3 hours or 8 hours, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I also think like when it comes to like, I don't know, cleaning for an institution, it still has that kind of hard-headed World War II approach of like, if you get seen not doing anything, you got to be looking busy.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, that now that's changing somewhat because now so many people are working home or working remotely, so you
Mhm.
don't have that as much. But there's a lot of companies pushing to bring that back, and we'll see what happens with that. I don't know if it'll ever be the same again, frankly. I mean, a lot of people wanted to work remotely before this all started,
Mhm.
and now the pandemic has basically proven that you can run a company that way and you can get things done. And from what I've seen, at least for me personally, working home, I actually work more than I did before. And I feel happier about it. I did really like being in the office, and then frankly, if I could go back and have everyone in the office more for just this being social and seeing people and
Absolutely.
information sharing in a more casual way was happening all the time, and that was really nice. Well, that's gone now, and it may come back in the future. I don't
Ooh.
think it's coming back anytime soon.
Oh,
And for us, we're going to stay remote, so we're not going to change that one. We've gone this way, and it's effective, so there's
mhm.
no real reason for us to go back.
Yeah. Well, I'll pose you with one last ending question along with remote talk here. What do you think about a hybrid approach? I know that you guys probably won't be going back to that, but like a 2 days or 3 days in the office, just coming in to like, even if it's like for a few hours to shoot like ideas or for some meetings. Because I
Well, what we've yeah, what I've done recently is just try to encourage people to come back in the office by having events and
okay.
like kind of, but not, we've kind of committed ourselves to not forcing people to come into the office.
Mhm.
And part of it is trying to figure out, like, well, what's the real benefit of being in person? It is definitely good for your culture. When you have a good culture, it's good for camaraderie. It's particularly good for people who are right out, yeah, out of school and inexperienced to learn a company culture. They see more of it. It's more in front of you. You develop relationships faster. um but we've also found that by having virtual events and some other things, we can establish some of those things, and we can grow. We can make that happen in different ways, and we can. But I I still like meeting in person, but I don't think we're at the point where it makes sense to force anyone. And I myself, like, everyone has to commute in, so we're all commuting in, and it
Oh,
takes a lot of time,
yeah.
and
Efficiency
that's
drops during that too.
yeah, it falls off. So
Yeah.
like, I think we gain more by being remote, frankly.
Mhm.
So, I'll be interested to see how I think if we did that, people would probably be okay with it. Although I think we would have to put an asterisk by it. We've also hired a lot of people throughout the US now that, so, before we were hiring almost only exclusively in Chicago in the US. And since the pandemic, we've hired all over the country. And so now, like, even when we want to have a big company meeting, getting people in person will cost us a lot of money to fly everybody in.
Mhm.
And again, I just don't see that the value of being in person is going to outweigh, you know, the
The
happiness people have when we're working remote, and in the efficiency we're getting from remote work too. So,
absolutely.
and I think some of it goes back to trusting your people too. I mean, we judge each other in our company by how we perform and the outcomes and the outputs we do when we're doing these projects. And so, on some level, if there was ever a fear, which there's not, and this goes back to the trust you were talking about, trusting your employees, we trust that everyone's going to be working towards these outcomes. So, like, counting the minutes or counting the hours is only important when we're billing a client. It's not important when we're trying to achieve outcomes. So, seeing people in the office, that's just not something we're concerned with. To make sure they're actually getting work done, we do that in other ways, right?
Mhm.
So I don't know. The benefit is really only, you know developing your culture, but I think there's other ways to do that, and I definitely think building social bonds and all that's there too. It just doesn't outweigh the benefit of working remote in my
Yeah.
mind.
I can understand that completely. Yeah. I think it's an interesting dynamic that we're growing into. Um
And I'll state that, uh, before the pandemic, I was very much against working remote because I did not like to work remote. I didn't like to work from home because when I was home, I felt less efficient, and I felt like I felt easily distracted, but part of that was just getting into a rhythm of doing it and making sure you had a desk and all your stuff there that you can work. And once I established that, now like it's great. I get up in the morning, I make some breakfast, walk my daughter to school, come back, sit at my desk, work all day. It's like it's really it's good. I like it, and I'm more efficient now.
Probably because you're more
Now,
relaxed too. You don't have to get
yeah,
there on time. Well, you gotta get there on time, but you know what I mean. Like you don't
yeah,
gotta be rushing to get through traffic and this and that.
right. There's less variables that can disrupt things, and so it's easier. And like again, I love going into the office, and when I do, I do spend time talking to everyone and chit chatting, and it's a little bit easier in person than getting on a Zoom with someone and having chit chat when there's not a specific purpose. So we do miss that for sure, but like I said, I don't think it outweighs
Hmm.
the benefits as it stand right now.
Absolutely. Well, I think with that, man, we've been going for a while. I've really enjoyed this, though. Do you have anything
Yeah.
else you wanted to cover before we hopped out of
No,
here?
no, no. Thanks for the opportunity to talk.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. Everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you have an awesome day. Thank you.
All right. See ya.